Hi everyone, thank you for attending today's CREST webinar. So AiSP has been organizing a series of CREST webinar for 2021, and this is the third CREST webinar series that we have. So before we begin, we would like to run through some of the house rules for today's event. So please note that this session will be recorded for AiSP members to access after the event. If you experience any technical problems using WebEx on your computer or devices, please exit the session and rejoin the webinar. Please note that AiSP reserves the rights to remove any disruptive participants from the webinar and blacklist participants for future events. Here are the programs for today. So we will have Arthur, who is a member of AiSP, share about the presentation on have secured your AD. How about your Azure AD? And then the second presentation is by Sergey, the application security lead from Acronis. We'll be talking about the releasing secure features, top mistakes of huge web portals. After that, we'll be having a Q&A session to address all the queries that you have. So now let us hand over the time to Arthur to do his sharing on presentation focusing on you have secured your AD. How about your Azure AD?
Thank you. Hi everyone. Let me please share my screen. Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
All right. Hi everyone. Today's topic is you have secured your Active Directory. What about your Azure AD? We will talk a little bit on how to approach Azure AD during your security assessment. So my name is Arthur. I work as cybersecurity consultant, mostly on providing offensive security services. I'm interested in Active Directory security, penetration testing, red teaming, adversary threat simulation, and malware development. I have a number of related industry certifications as well. I added my Twitter and email details on this slide. So later, if anyone will have any questions or would like to discuss anything after this presentation, you can reach out to me over Twitter or email address. Let's quickly look at today's agenda. So what are we going to discuss today? We will look into difference between Active Directory and Azure Active Directory, as there might be some confusion because Active Directory and Azure AD, even if it sounds similar, it's two different things. After that, we will do a quick look at how Active Directory and Azure AD is integrated with each other. We will look into the components of Azure Active Directory. Definitely, we're not going to dive into the details and discuss all the components because that will require another few sessions. Also, we will look into Azure Active Directory threats from cyber security assessment perspective. We will touch and discuss some of the common threats. After that, we will also discuss a little bit about different assessment methods, approaches, and we'll look into some of the common threats. And last but not least, we will also discuss a little bit about detection and prevention mechanism and features in Azure. All right, let's begin. So these days, a lot of people talk about Active Directory security and how vulnerable it is and how important it is to keep it secure. But what about Azure AD? The name is similar, but it's not the same. So Azure AD is identity as a service. It tries to address aspects of identity, access management, and security. So Azure AD can be used to access both internal and external resources. When I say external resources, I mean mobile devices, VMs on the cloud, and other devices on premise as well. So you might have a question: if Azure encourage people to migrate from on-prem to cloud, and they have resources such as VM, shouldn't they have a proper ID as well? They have something similar, which is called Azure Active Directory Domain Services, but still it has a number of limitations. And usually it's integrated with Azure AD and ADDC on-premise environment, which allow you to extend your on-premise identities to run in Azure. So when I start digging into Azure AD, I asked a few questions. One of them was, why Azure Active Directory? So the answer is simple. Great at managing user access to cloud applications, allow you to authenticate from anywhere in the world, support mobile devices, and of course, security. So definitely, if we look at this slide, it's difficult to create comparison table between Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. So I use multiple resources to create this table, so people can visualize and better understand that they are totally different. So, for example, everyone knows that Active Directory use LDAP protocol compared to Azure AD. For example, Azure AD mostly using REST APIs. When it comes to authentication protocol, Active Directory using NTLM, Kerberos, while Azure AD using authentication, SAML, OpenID Connect. And when we talk about domain structure, Active Directory is well known for domain, forest, while Azure AD, we can see they have got something similar, which is tenant and core domain. And the great thing about Active Directory on premise, right? It's of course group policy. It's when you can make any changes, can push any changes to multiple computers at the same time. While Azure AD doesn't have that, but it has something similar, which is called conditional access policy. And when it comes to mobile device management, Azure AD has its advantages. It has mobile device management via Intune, for example. So on this diagram, we can better understand actually how they integrated with each other. So if you already have Active Directory environment, you can actually run that in conjunction with Azure Active Directory environment. One of the connector will be Azure AD Connect. So on this diagram, we can see that Azure AD Connect allow you to connect your Azure AD to your on-prem Active Directory. Azure AD Connect use an agent that's installed on the server, and actually it's connected to the domain and automatically synchronize data from Active Directory to Azure Active Directory. Before, we also mentioned about Azure AD Domain Services, okay, which is similar to Active Directory on premise. It's also Azure product that provides managed domain services such as GPO, LDAP, domain joining, authentication via Kerberos and NTLM. You can use these domain services without the need to deploy, manage, and patch domain controllers in the cloud. Also, from this diagram, we can see how mobile devices outside of cloud and outside of the premise network can connect to Azure cloud through Azure Active Directory. So this slide is a good representation of Azure AD in a hierarchy way. For example, management groups used to manage multiple subscriptions. Interesting thing is that a global administrator can always elevate their privileges to the root management group. Subscription. An Azure subscription is a billing or access control boundary in Azure Active Directory. An Azure role applied at the subscription level. And actually, that's one of the flow in Azure. If an attacker has enough access, he can manage entire subscription. Resource group acts as a container for the resources. All resources should have a group. If the group is deleted, all the resources will be deleted. And the last one is resources, which is your virtual machines, application, app services, storage account, and etc. So there is multiple ways to perform security assessment and improve cybersecurity posture, different technology or technology group. We're not going to discuss all of them, but we will touch a few of them which are somehow alike. Let's look at these three. In a way, these activities similar, but objectives and goals are different. For example, vulnerability assessment will help to perform comprehensive vulnerability assessment and might provide a lot of false positive results. Penetration testing will focus on finding and testing all exploitable vulnerabilities. It's much cheaper and more accurate than VA and provide a better coverage compared to VA. The last one is threat. The last one on this slide, the threat simulation and red teaming, right? These two might be performed in multiple ways, but for this webinar, we will combine them because some of the points and things that we're going to discuss can be used both when you're performing your threat simulation or when you're performing your red teaming exercise, right? Or you're doing your purple teaming. So though the points that we're going to discuss can be used all of them. That's why we combine them. So the threat simulation will be mostly objectives-based assessment, which might include breaching and bypassing defenses, going above assessment based on security standards and frameworks. Anyway, both of them will look for vulnerabilities which could help to achieve selected objectives or could lead to a huge impact. Now let's look at the approach that you can use. So the approach on this slide, I'm pretty sure most of us seen already, right? Scoping, fingerprinting, scanning, exploitation, risk assessment, reporting, and closure, right? It's been around for a while and there is no need to discuss them. But what can we do to improve it, to achieve a better results during our assessment or threat simulation, whatever it is? To our approach, actually, we can add few more steps to make it better based on my experience. So first thing can be briefing session. That's a way you could discuss about the current infrastructure, about current environment, better understand how it operates. Selecting objectives. Instead of just blindly running the scan on the assets in scope, you could try to identify most critical assets, what are the business objectives, and the most valuable assets. It will help to structure the scope and narrow down attack vectors as well. So you can focus more on the valuable assets. After selecting objectives, you can proceed to generating scenarios. It's where you could generate scenarios based on your objectives. Once objectives selected, scenarios are generated. Next step can be threat simulation. Yes, that's That's where you're gonna use your scenarios. Everyone can run automated tools, right, and scans, but threat simulation is a bit different, and sometimes, most of the times, can provide you results that will surprise you. Another point is teaching and collaboration. That's where additional value impact come from. That's where you could have a collaborative session with your defenders, your architects, developers, administrators. That's a way you can discuss together on how certain weak points or vulnerabilities can be fixed, not just by relying on best security practices, but try to really make an impact in your organization. These days, teaching and collaboration, some of the people might use during their purple teaming exercise. And of course, debrief. That's where you could summarize everything and discuss what can be improved on your next assessment. Each of these steps equally important, but this session is limited. That's why we're not gonna discuss in details all of them. Let's dive into the resources that can be used when you're generating your scenarios and performing your assessment, threat simulation, or your red team operation. There is plenty of the resources that can be used, but I listed those that I found the most useful. For example, MITRE framework. That's a globally accessible knowledge base of adversary tactics, techniques, and procedures based on the real world. MITRE also has a matrix, different matrix for different technologies. So MITRE even has a matrix focusing on the cloud and especially on Azure Active Directory, which clearly demonstrate that this area and this technology have been targeted for a while, and there is a plenty of research around this area. Another thing is threat intelligence, another resource that can be used. Being updated about latest TTPs is one of the most viral thing. Community will also be very useful. Of course, it will help you to know about the latest threats and the latest tools and techniques that you can also utilize during your security assessment. And of course, experience and skill. Having experienced people, skilled people who can perform this, that it's also important. Right, I like this slide. To know your enemy, you must become your enemy, which clearly says that you should know how attackers operate in order to build or improve your defenses. We have discussed a bit about Azure AD, types of assessment, approach, and useful resources. Let's dig a bit deeper and look at the visualization of sample kill chain in Azure. From my perspective, kill chains can be different and all depends on the environment and the objectives. So this is just a sample kill chain or Azure AD. Okay, so it starts with reconnaissance, C2 initial access, persistence, discovery, privilege escalation, lateral movement, credential success, exfiltration, and impact. So certain items can be added, certain can be removed. So it depends on your objectives and on your assessment. And each of these group has a number of techniques that can be used to compromise Azure AD. For example, you might also want to include defense evasion during your assessment. So it all depends on your goals and business objectives. So now let's look in some of the common threats and techniques under these groups. So under reconnaissance, some of the common techniques will be seeing active scanning, fishing for information. That's where you try to gather information about your target. Okay, so OSINT is mostly passive scanning, where you try to gather information and try to be undetectable under the hood. Then the active scanning is more intrusive, fishing for information, where you try to get sensitive information from the victim in order to get initial access to the environment. So under each of these group, number of techniques. Once you usually gather information, you can proceed to initial access. You can try to use valid accounts or some default accounts in order to get initial access, spear phishing, password spray, brute force, or exploit public-facing application for initial access. For persistence, you can utilize account manipulation, existing accounts. For discovery, once you manage to get access to the environment, you try to enumerate the accounts, the groups, software in use, try to find which VMs are there, which application are running. It's very similar to Active Directory security assessment. Then for privilege escalation, domain policy modification can be used as well. Valid accounts, key vault, that's where the password secret can be stored. Automation account, we will cover this today in the details. Collateral movement, internal spear phishing, for credential access, brute force. For exfiltration, some of the APT use transfer data to cloud account, and impact, very similar to any other techniques for other technology groups. Okay, let's jump into the details for some of these techniques to see how it can be done and how they can be linked. So for example, recon. Usually what attacker will try to see if target organization can be accessed from the public network. The way to discover is very similar to any other pen testing in the cloud environment, but we will try to look into that later. So what will attacker look at? Is Azure AD in use? What's the tenant name and ID? Which authentication type in use? What's the domain? What are the services in use? Emails and etc. Might sound simple, but all of these can be used for further attacks. For example, in order to get initial access. So this sample screenshot actually show how you can identify the valid accounts in Azure AD. Also, from here you can identify the valid domain, the organization name, and what's the authentication method used. There is also some of the PowerShell and PowerShell scripts that you can use. For example, once you found a valid domain name, you can utilize this script in order to find the valid tenant ID. Or the same way, you can just use your web browser to find the tenant ID. For example, from here, we can see that authentication tool is used for login. Another interesting tool, as well PowerShell tool, is invoke enumerate Azure subdomain. It can help you to identify Azure services in use. For example, we can see that organization is using Outlook, they're using SharePoint, Microsoft hosted domains. Okay, so this information can be used as well for your initial access, or let's say when you're trying to get initial access through exploiting the public facing application, or for your spear phishing. So once we know the domain, we know that they're using Outlook, we know that if they're using Outlook, we might try to find emails, right? So there is a tool called hunterio. It's a Python script which can help you to find the valid email accounts. Just now we try to use some simple techniques to gather some information which can be used for initial access. Let's see how we can utilize this for initial access. Okay. What can we try? We can try to utilize few techniques from Mitre Matrix. For example, valid accounts, spear phishing, exploit public-facing application, or password spray and brute force. Few quick tips on defeating this will be password policy, MFA, user account management, and very important to monitor the activities on the cloud to detect abnormal or malicious activities. So let's look into password spray because it's a quick one and it's a good demonstration. So since we already knew the email address, we can try to perform the password spray. There is some scripts available for that as well. So for example, on the first screenshot, we can see that we were able to find the valid password. So let's say we don't want to use, before we covered how we can identify valid email addresses using the tools, right? But actually, you can also double check if the email address is valid or not just by navigating to Microsoft Azure website. So once you found valid credentials, you can use PowerShell scripts to access Azure Active Directory, or you can just log into Azure portal and operate from there. So once an attacker get access to the environment, right? For example, we covered that we managed to find the username and password. We managed to access Azure resources. What will we try to check? If we look into the tenant, groups, users, access rights, roles, application devices, and VMs. This is only a few things that you might look at. The right side, I also list a couple of tools that can be used for that to enumerate these services. And all this information can be found via portal Azure, or you can use some PowerShell module or Azure CLI. This is some examples of how you can enumerate users, groups, VMs from the PowerShell. I'm pretty sure everyone also heard about the Azure Hound. Attackers and defenders, both of them use. There is an Azure Hound module or Azure Active Directory. It's also GUI visualization. So it will get the information from Azure, then you import into this tool, and it can help you to visualize all the data in order to find some flows. All right, so we covered recon, we covered initial access, covered some enumeration in Azure AD environment. So another thing, few other important things will be privilege escalation and lateral movement. So we will try to combine these two and show how these two can be linked with each other. So before we jump to the screenshot and technical details, let's just first understand about automation account in Azure AD. Azure Automation Service allows to automate tasks for Azure resources, on-premise infra and cloud. Supports process automation using Runbooks for hosted on Azure and on-premise. Usually, automation is used to deploy VMs, configure changes, configure VMs. Automation account has run as account, which is used to provide authentication for managing Azure resources. So what we're gonna do, we're going to try to abuse this functionality on Azure AD in order to escalate privileges and perform lateral movement. In order to achieve that, what will attacker try to do? He will try to find some interesting permissions on automation accounts in tenant, abuse permissions on automation account to execute a cloud on-premise lateral movement, and get command execution. So for this scenario, we use that in this scenario, we compromise the user who is using Azure CLI. Our compromised user owns a group called Automation Admins. Even if our user wasn't the owner, we would know that this group is interesting just by looking at its name. Yeah, hybrid automation. We can see that user owns a group, Automation Admins. It's also say that member of this group can run runbooks. If he is not part of this group, we can try to add him since he is the owner of the group, very similar to Active Directory environment on premise. We need to check our user role on automation account. And we can see that we have a contributor role. Contributor role can create, abuse, and execute runbooks. There is multiple roles, so keep in mind that. So once we identify that we have sufficient privileges, what we can try to do, we can try to import our runbook. It can be your custom scripts. For example, in this scenario, we're using a custom PowerShell script. And when you're writing the command, you also need to specify automation account. In this scenario, it was hybrid automation. After importing the runbook, we can publish the runbook so that we can use it. So after publishing it, we can finally execute our runbook. So that runbook might, as I mentioned, might contain your custom PowerShell script command, let's say to add a user, new user, then that user you can later use to access other resources. The good thing that when you run the runbook, it will be run as NT-authority. So later, using account with NT-authority, you can even disable the defenses. And another area is Credential Success. Everyone heard about Mimikatz. So in Azure AD, you can also run Mimikatz to dump the credentials. You can perform password spraying, password guessing, which we also cover today. Another interesting area is unsecured credentials. For example, key vaults, storage blows. It's a huge area and topic to discuss. So I just listed here. And another thing under credential access will be stealing tokens. Azure CLI stores tokens on user directory on that machine, as well as Azure PowerShell. You can also try to find the tokens in PowerShell process. If you try to dump the PowerShell process, you can find your token there. Another thing where you can find your token is in the PowerShell console history. I know these days CIS benchmarking require you to disable PowerShell history. So actually it's bad, because if you disable PowerShell history, how will you be able to trace back what attacker executed in PowerShell if you don't have ETR solution? So there's always a flaws. So once you manage to get the tokens, you can utilize multiple APIs in Azure for communication. For example, ARM token are commonly used for managing Azure resources, or AD graph tokens are used for managing Azure AD resources. All right, so we covered about the current threat landscape in the Azure Active Directory. We discussed about some common techniques that can be used. We also discussed how you can improve your approach during your security assessment. So on this slide, what I want to discuss is Azure Security. So For defenders, it's very important to have a proper visualization. They need to know what's happening in the environment in order to know how they can build their defenses. So Azure Security is built around 6 areas: operations, identity, application, storage, networking, and compute. We're not going to discuss all of them in details because I guess you don't need to use all of them. You just need to identify your weak points and select those that can be useful for your organization and for your infrastructure. So I guess it's been around 35 minutes already. That's all from my side.
Thank you, Arthur, for your sharing. So to all the attendees, if you have any queries for Arthur, please type the queries chat function or the Q&A function. So let us invite Sergey to start on with.
Second. Yep. Hello. Hi there. Share my screen. Can you see?
Yep.
Okay, great. Hi everyone. My name is Sergey. I'm from Acronis. It's a company in Singapore and with a headquarters as well in Switzerland. So we do cyber protection. And so what I do in Acronis, so I'm application security lead in Acronis, and we are with my team, we do a lot of security reviews of new features, and we are managing our bug bounty program on the HackerOne, and just forcing everything and doing everything to keep our application secure. And for like past few years, so I think we made dozens of different security reviews of very different projects, and the mistakes like I see, they usually are the same. And so today my goal is to share a typical functionality that you are usually implementing as developers or leaders or architects, and to review the functionality that you can see also on a very huge portals, and I want to share typical mistakes and how implement it in a secure way. So this is topics I want to cover today, 11 topics. I think we will spend like a bit for each subject, and yeah, so let's go. The stateless sessions. So usually just when we're starting to create new projects, so obviously we need the sessions, and I don't know why, like, but developers really like JWT and stateless sessions. What does it mean? Like, so usually you just providing a session object itself to the client and just signing it with your private key. And so you're calculating the hash and signature and just checking without storing the session itself on your side, on the server side. So it's very convenient. So no single point of failure, easy for deployment. And yeah, so, but usually like when developers implement sessions, stateless sessions, they don't think about, for example, key rotation. So we're using some key to design the session, and this key like could be leaked somehow, like if your project is kind of old and working for a year, so it's can be different mistakes, just committing somewhere this key to the GitHub or somewhere else, or some old employees like who already left a company could have access in the past to this key. So you need to implement key rotation. and it's kind of hard. So like you need to support a few cases at the same time, do some automation for that, and so on. Yeah, the second question I'm usually asking when developers want to implement is stateless sessions. What you will do if user will change password? So like user changes the password, we obviously need to revoke other sessions that are already created. So because usually users don't change their password just in case. They suspect something is wrong and account could be compromised already. So we had to revoke the old sessions. With the stateless sessions, it's kind of hard because you need to have some state in stateless sessions and to mark that like sessions created before some time shall be revoked. So you're losing the stateless. And other case, I see, so people love to use like frameworks like Angular or Vue.js, and they just putting this JWT to the session storage to the browser. No, it should not. The session it should be always be stored in a cookie, because like in a cookie we have a security flags. So and in case of cross-site scripting, like attacker couldn't access to the session, but in case if you're storing in the session storage, so it could be stolen. And your choice always is stateful sessions via cookies. This is just another slide, and there's a good article about stateless sessions that's like all the points that could be, hey, like we want to apply JWT for a session, so you shall not, because you will always have a security problem, and all the security problems will be solved with the states. So just use stateful sessions, because you have a full control under that, so you can revoke any session, like to allow to user like to see like what kind of active sessions you have, what last IP addresses, and so on. You can reissue like, so just to change the current session to another one in case of for a pre-expire, and so on. So use always a dedicated domain name like ours example.com, and don't use any shared applications with the same session storage. So let me explain the last 2 points in more details. So why, like usually no one's thinking, so where we should to put our certification, and just putting to the same domain. But if you are creating a website from the scratch, so it could be a good way how you can make it in a secure way, into a secure way. So since if you're just putting a session to example, like your domain example.com, cookies can be well guarded. So why, what does it mean? So if I'm going to like some other subdomain like subdomain.example.com, so cookies will be sent by the browser. How to, and the problem is that if some other resource, like not the main project, is compromised, the cookie could be leaked as well. And what is the correct way to authenticate the user? I create a domain like ourexample.com and set the super cookie when the user passes all the checks, like you're sure that the user knows the password, pass it to FA, and so on, and set the super cookie. While accessing to some app example.com, check the project cookie for this domain, like session of some app example.com. If you see no cookie, but user probably already identified, so just make a redirection to ourexample.com and ask for a get for a like session token for some app. If the cookie is valid, just redirect back with some secret token to some app example.com. It should be one-time token, so it could be used only once. And then check with the server side, like from some app to our example.com. If the secret token is valid, just set a cookie project. And yeah, so and means like if the session in cookie is somehow leaked from one project, it don't will give access to other projects. So that's why it's very important and usually like implemented if you have a number of different subdomains and you want to use the same session. Yep, so and single domain where a user can authenticate, less chances for phishing attacks because you just forcing the user, okay, you have only one domain and only one window where you input your password, your 2FA, and it's actually a bad practice to ask a password of a user in different places. So it's also just a point against social engineering attacks. Other point, why we have to use isolate session storage. It's just happening, still happening, and it's very old issue. It's still happening. What was done in the past by different attackers? So imagine you want to host your application, shared hosting, and you have your domain, and you just set up at your CMS. And what is the next? So you just log in with your login password as administrator, and you have a session. And so it's a session placed somewhere like in TMP sessions and random session ID. So where you have your session data. What is a session? Session just a random value in your cookies that maps to your data on the server. Yeah. So I have some user ID. What's happening next? So attacker can just register his own domain name like hunterio.com, can install the same CMS and obtain by serialized format the same session and like with a user ID number 1. So and what attacker can do, you just can copy paste and the session value like this random hash from the domain like attacker.com and use it and set it to your domain. And since if in case the session storage is the same, so it's your CMS just will look up to the session, will find a user ID which was malicious and crafted. So and probably will give access to the attacker to the admin panel or to any other things. And what is happening nowadays? Usually just trying to save resources, developers just deploying different applications and using the same session storages. So what attackers can do is they can register 100,000 of accounts on some website of your project and just receiving a different user IDs because they're just incrementing, and use these sessions against some other portal and just can get access to some random accounts of another portal. So in a stateful session, so it's very important to use a different session storages for the projects. Other thing to cover and very popular feature, download file by link. So like you just put in a link and the website trying to make a preview of this link, tries to show a thumbnail of image or something else, like very typical functionality we see like everywhere on social networks when you're making the post and in the messengers and so on. So it's kind of popular. And so Jira tasks like saying allow user to download files by link. Developers just say like we have a link, let's download it. And what attacker can do is attacker can pass an not expected scheme and URL for you, and like even read local files from the system, like some system files, because that functions in the modern languages, so they just don't care where should to go, so and they can read local files. Or attacker can access to some local network, or even ask to go for a to localhost, and if you're serving some admin panels there, so it could be bad. And this attack is called SSRF, so server-side request forgery. And it's kind of hard to protect, honestly. But what you should check? Of course, you just check the scheme, that HTTP and HTTPS. Check the destination IP that's not in local network and not in trusted zone. What's trusted zone? Probably you have some public IP addresses, but they somehow are whitelisted for different things. So don't allow to download anything and to make any request to such addresses. And it's very important to double check after redirection or just disable redirection. What does it mean? So you're just checking, it could be a link like attacker.com, and you're checking that everything is okay, but this link just serving a redirect, like 302 redirect, HTTP redirect, and the next hop will be like your local network. So just you have to check always the redirections and do the same checks or the redirections if you can. Check the destination part, of course, like it will be HTTP and HTTPS. But still, like even if you're checking here everything, what could be done by attacker? So you're trying to resolve an IP address and you see that external IP address is everything is okay, but then you could try to download a file even from your some microservice, and these servers will make a new DNS resolve. And what attacker can do for the first DNS request, attacker can serve a valid IP address for you, but just for the second DNS resolve, it serves like some local IP. So, and this is a race condition between two requests. So, and like modern libraries and like Python requests, they allows you to pass or curl to pass an IP address that you resolve it to HTTP lib. So, and your software will not make any other DNS request. So, and you will be safe from a race condition. Of course, it could be issues in HTTP libraries, so keep them updated. If you're just switching to IPv6, so be careful as well, because double check that's how you're working and that the same checks applies for IPv6. And usually, like the most easiest way is just set up a container, like a Docker container, and disable any access to the local network, and use this container as a proxy for all your external requests for all your software. So, and it's a little bit safer. The secret keys. So we all need the different secret keys while developing web applications, and like for signing stateless things like sessions, if you're still using it, like secret for protections, credentials to databases, so on. So don't hardcode them, and yep. So use move them to config files and deploy these config files via Puppet here YAML. So with encrypted Puppet, and yep, so that's it. So it is in a good way, and usually like different teams are can deploy these secrets to the project, so it and they live in an isolated environment. Temporary tokens. So we have a number of them. Imagine you're just asking for a password remind, and you're receiving a link to reset the password to your email, or you just want to provide a link to leave a feedback for some booking or confirm actions. So, and of course, like because you're sending them to email, so you're putting that to the GET request. And what's the threats for temporary tokens? They could be like in the access log, and if you have like an encrypted sale, so and could probably just some non-authorized person could get access to these logs. It would be user can set up email forwarding and to forward it to some other people, and of course it's also kept in a browser history. So like temporary tokens are really important, and what are the main rules to implement a temporary tokens? They should not start a real session. What do you mean here? Like if you have a token for a password changing, so don't start a real session of the user. Just allows to change only the password, and that's it. And yeah, so set the lifetime, of course, and bind to the parameters if you can. Like, okay, so this token works only for feedback only to this order ID, only to this user, and only for this action. So that's like, even if this token will be like leaked somehow, so attacker can only do some bad things against this action and no more. There is thing, third-party websites on the main domain. What business usually wants, like they wants to host the promo sites or just any different things on the main project, like example.com/project name. But at example.com, you have a main project with with all the important things for you, with the current session of user, with some sensitive functionality and so on. And in case if these projects that could be not maintained by you, so is there really any security issues like cross-site scripting, so it will affect the main project as well. But it's also possible to host it in a insecure way. So what usually people do, they just host in the same server or do the proxy path to this project, but just by Nginx. But it will be solved easier. So usually we can just put it to the to iframe, and in this iframe, without like any issues usually. So we can set it in frame and to load this web portal from iframe. So and also even if there will be any issues, it will not affect the main domain. And in case if you need to interact somehow with your main domain, so you can share the user's data with a post message. So it's just send post message from this iframe to your main domain and to handle it how you want. So, and of course, double check the regions while sending and receiving post messages. Third-party monitoring and sensitive data. Yeah, so we have usually pages, sensitive pages like that, like password changes, like credit card linking, and any others. And it's very, so like we don't recommend to embed any external trackers or analytics or any static from external domains that not belongs to the company and you are not responsible for. So why? Because like in password change. So if you're just putting it secret token to the get parameter and you have some external image from, I don't know, from any other resource on this page or any other static, what browsers will do? They're requesting this static image or any other thing from the external domain and will send a referrer header, so it will contain the current URL, and in current URL it could be a secret token for a password change, and the owner and who have access to the access log of this third-party website, so they could just check the access log and grab session tokens, temporary tokens, everything could be there, and so this is bad. And the same like about JavaScript. So if not responsible, like they could for external domain, so they could do any malicious things, like, and you could be not aware about that. So don't use third-party things on sensitive pages. The next thing I think popular for years already and still discussing. So all the businesses want to switch from SMS to the push notifications. And why? Because just SMS are expensive. So and they have sometimes issues with delivery and so on. And but other things that's also about SMS. So they have a not good security compared with the push notifications, because so like how interception SMS could like even happen. So there are attacks via SS7. SS7 is a signal network between all the teller operators around the world. So, and what attackers can do, they trying to be such provider and or they trying to hack existing SS7 customers, and they can just say, okay, this customer now in my roaming, and all this mess will be forwarded to some malicious teller operator, so it's bad. There is still lack of physical, like if attacker could be physically near to the victim, so it's usually still possible in different countries to intercept the SMS, and it costs too much money. Yep. So others, the third vector, it's kind of interesting what happened in Australia a few years ago. So there was a functionality on Google, Facebook, and everywhere. So you're just asking for a code, and so it says like, "Hey, we sent you SMS. You can press the button. I didn't receive any SMS. Please call me and tell the code." So what is happening next is some robot trying to call you and to say what's your secret code to reset to confirm your action. And what happened in Australia, so just it was a scenario by security researchers. They implemented it. So they just trying to call to the victim and to busy the line. And why, when line is busy, at the same time they asking to call the robot to tell the secret code. What happening next? So this science line is busy. A robot putting this message to the voicemail. So now the secret code in the voicemail, and there was another issue that was it was possible to brute force password from a voice email and to get access to the voicemail itself and read the secret code. So IVR and telling the code is depends is secure or not, mostly from a country. So, but still a vector. Yeah, of course it could be malware on mobile phones. It could be reissue of SIM cards and or any other things. With push notifications, it's kind of harder to intercept because so attackers have to find issues in Google, Apple, or Microsoft. Like now, I think it's mostly only Google and Apple or Amazon, so they have also their own push notification system, and it's kind of hard. So obviously, the second, if your service implemented it in some wrong way, and you have an issue as it's possible to subscribe to the push notification of some another user ID. And in some cases, some mobile apps, even on iOS, they can have access to the push notifications, like to the smartwatches, to the multimedia system, the cards, and so on. So, and issues on these applications so could be used to intercept the push notification, but still like very rare scenarios. And how to switch from SMS to push notifications. So usually we just suppose that user receiving the first SMS in some safe environment. So here you can get a device ID. So user receiving an SMS, you can get device ID, and then just linking this device ID and this number to this user. And yeah, the second thing, if you're sending a secret code to the inside of applications and you don't need to show it because your application can handle it. So you can transfer the secret code inside of a payload of the push notification and even don't show it on the screen. So because so then if user have to click to this push notification and will open the application itself, so and everything will be fine. And of course the security subscription API, so it's important that's not to allow any other user to subscribe to notification of any other users. The next thing, it's still popular, and these two libraries, FFmpeg and ImageMagick, they are kind of popular if developers working with media files, and they were created in a long time in the past, not to work with the user files. It was only for trusted files. And Magic here is a special word because the ImageMagick really do the magic. You're just passing the image and asking for things, and they do. And you don't need to think like how does it work. It's the same with FFmpeg. So, but consider like if you're using FFmpeg or ImageMagick, any user that can ask your application to convert a file can read any files on the servers or execute any operation system commands. Why? Because it was not supposed to be for the to use to everyone in the world, and there are many critical security issues in the past and still happening. Like with this link, you can check different payloads for FFmpeg in any case. So, but what to do? ImageMagick, in most of cases, could be replaced with the native libs like libspec, libpng, libgif, and some others, which already are used by browsers. And browsers made a good work to secure these libs and fuzz them for years. So just don't use ImageMagick, use a native libs if you can. But not libtiff. Libtiff, as you know, like you still cannot open TIFF files in your browser. Why? Because it's not possible to parse in secure way TIFF files. So yeah, but FFmpeg, honestly, there are no other solutions. So I think it's only one solution that's using everywhere, and even on YouTube. So if they're using FFmpeg for converting videos, and in such case, like if you need to convert TIFF files or you have to use FFmpeg, do sandboxing on operation system level, like to put in the Docker, disable network, disable any access to the host system, and so on. Deploy it in the isolated network. So if you can, just create an REST API to the service, like so use it as a service. That's all. So you just have some API, and you know that it could be like deployed somewhere else, or have no access to the internet network, so on. So deploy it there, and disable everything that you don't need, like demuxers and FFmpeg while compiling. So you can disable a lot of things on the compile. So it's the same with ImageMagick. You can disable the old formats, like not popular formats and so on, and do a LO list for files that you really need to convert. Next feature is the serving user content, obviously, so we usually need it. So what is user content? So users wants to upload their pictures, their files, their PDFs, so on. And what are the rules? Serve it from another domain, like we have example.com, serve it from example content from users.com. Why? Because if there will be any XSS, like in the files, you know, you will allow to upload in HTML files. So even if there will be any cross-site scripting, it will not affect the main domain. Disable any interface on the backend, like usually don't need your Python or PHP backend for such services, because that's it. You just need to serve it like CDN. And if file is private, like attachments in mails and messengers, you can generate a temporary token and check it on opening. And even possible to do like in Jinx with NGS or with Lua and so on. So check should be like simply just generating a key, checking the time live, and that's it, and then making a decision to serve it or not. The next, probably I think last, is about cryptography. This main advice: do not implement your own cryptography, even if it seems right to you. Like, okay, so we need cryptography, and I just will use some existing library. No, because like if you think that you need cryptography, you probably not, because in most of cases it could be replaced with a stateful in a stateful way. Like, why you need cryptography? Okay, I want to get a temporary token and sign it for a while. So you don't. You just can generate a token, put it into database, save it, and that's it. Yeah. So you don't need cryptography. But yeah, so that's it. But if you think that you still need it, like you don't like sees that you don't have any other options and you have spent a day, take your case, like what you need, and like storing of password hashes. Choose a popular net frameworks that you believe, like WordPress or Django or Ruby on Rails, and see how it's done there. So usually, like popular frameworks are already reviewed by many of security specialists and experts, and yeah, at least if you will implement exactly how they implemented and will not change anything, so it should be like good enough. Yeah, but still, usually you don't need your own crypto. Yeah, and rate limits. Yeah, next thing to discuss is rate limits. So if you're creating projects from the scratch, or you now just want to improve the security of your current project, so be able to restrict any API calls to the methods, like by the user. So like this user can call this kind of API no more than 5 times per 10 seconds. Why it's important? Because like if user can, if there will be any like a heavy API that will take a lot of resources, so you can rate limit them. You can rate limit such API calls. Be able to monitor how many times method is invoked. Like if you have a password reset method, so you can set monitoring for that and see what is the normal way how users are just changing their password. And any anomaly usually shows and signs that there are probably some security issue and attacker trying to exploit it. But it could be any method, like you think. It's a login of users, password changing, password resetting, any other heavy operations you think, or money sent, like how many transactions they're making, and so on. And yeah, so and if you could to implement in several ways, like do a time shift or after a confirmation, like entering the captcha. Yep. Yeah, I think that's all on my side. Happy to answer any questions if anyone have.
What the attendees?
Okay, so then just you can reach me by email or by Sergey Belov everywhere on Twitter. So any questions later, or watching this presentation in the record.
Yep. Meanwhile, we would like to share while we wait for any questions from the attendees. Like to share guys our upcoming. We'll be having cyber leaders and share more insights from our from more and as well as our partner. Join us tonight if you are. Tomorrow we will also be now on cybersecurity for SME. And our last knowledge is on cyber threat intelligence. It will be held on at Lifelong Learning Institute. To join us. We have no further questions from come to the end